My father called me on a Tuesday morning in October. I was sitting in a hospital waiting room in Seattle, still wearing the clothes I'd slept in, clutching a paper cup of cold coffee that I hadn't touched in 2 hours. My phone buzzed and his name lit up the screen, Dad, and for just a second, I let myself believe it was going to be a normal call. Maybe he'd heard. Maybe someone had told him where I was and why, and he was calling to ask if I was okay. I picked up. "Elena," he said, without a hello, without "how are you?" "The rehearsal dinner is this Friday. Your sister needs you there. Do I have to remind you what's at stake?" I looked around the waiting room, at the other frightened faces, at the nurses walking past in their soft shoes, at the door that my mother was behind, unconscious, hooked to machines, fighting for her life. "Dad," I said quietly, "Mom is in the ICU." "I know where your mother is," he said, "and she would want Cassidy's wedding to go ahead. You know that. Now are you going to be there Friday or not?" I stared at the floor for a long moment. "No," I said. "I'm not." And that is when my father threatened to cut me from his will entirely. That is when everything changed. My name is Elena Marsh. I'm 34 years old. I'm a physical therapist, I own my own small practice, and I have, for most of my adult life, been the invisible daughter. This is the story of how I stopped being invisible, and how the family that spent 20 years treating me like furniture finally understood exactly what they'd lost. To understand what happened, you have to understand what our family looked like from the outside versus what it felt like on the inside. From the outside, the Marsh family was a success story. My father, Robert Marsh, built a regional construction company from nothing, genuinely nothing, he would remind us constantly, into something worth several $1,000,000 by the time I was in high school. My mother, Patricia, stayed home, kept the house immaculate, hosted dinner parties for my father's clients, and maintained the illusion that our family was a warm, united front. Cassidy, my younger sister by 4 years, was the front-page version of our family. She was beautiful in that effortless, photogenic way that made people stop mid-sentence. She was charismatic and funny, and she had this laugh that could fill a room. My father adored her. My mother fussed over her. Relatives asked about her at every gathering. When Cassidy got a B on a test, my mother called her teacher. When I got a B, my mother said, "Well, you were never much of a student." I don't say that to be cruel to Cassidy. For a long time, I genuinely believed that none of this was her fault, that she was just the beneficiary of a system she hadn't designed. She was born beautiful and charming, and she leaned into what the world rewarded her for. I understood that. I didn't blame her. Not then. I was the older daughter, the steady one, the reliable one. From the time I was 12, I was helping with the household books when my father's assistant quit, and he needed someone to organize invoices. I was 13 when I started cooking dinners because my mother had her spells, which is what we called her anxiety and depression back then because our family didn't believe in talking about those things directly. I was 17 when I got a part-time job without being asked, started saving for my own college applications, and told my parents I'd applied for scholarships because I didn't want to be a burden. "That's very mature of you," my father said, and went back to watching TV. He paid for Cassidy's college in full. He bought her a car at 16. He co-signed her apartment lease twice. He once flew to New York on a Wednesday because she was having a bad breakup and needed her dad. I graduated physical therapy school with $30,000 in loans, and my father's gift to me was a card that said, "Proud of you, kiddo." He signed it in ballpoint pen. He hadn't even picked out the card himself. It still had the faint price sticker on the back. I'm not telling you this to generate sympathy. I'm telling you this because you need to know the ground I was standing on when that phone call happened. You need to understand that I had been told, in 1,000 small and large ways, for my entire life, that I mattered slightly less, that my presence was expected and my absence would barely register, that being the steady, responsible, low-maintenance daughter was something to be taken for granted, not valued. The will was the one card my father had always held over me. Not explicitly, he wasn't that obvious. But every few years it would surface. A comment about how he wanted to make sure his girls were taken care of. A pointed remark, when I'd push back on something, that he hoped I wasn't burning bridges. I knew what the subtext was. Be good. be accommodating,
Stay in line.
or risk losing the one material acknowledgement that your years of quiet sacrifice meant something. I had spent a long time being good. Let me take you back to the 18 months before that hospital waiting room, because the Tuesday my father called me was not the beginning.
It was the end of something.
The closing of a door that had been swinging for a long, long time. Cassidy met Marcus at a charity gala 14 months before their wedding date. He was wealthy, not self-made wealthy the way my father was, but inherited wealthy, which my father seemed to respect even more. Within 3 months, they were engaged. Within 6 months, the wedding planning was at a fever pitch that consumed my entire family. My mother, whose anxiety had always cycled with stress, started struggling almost immediately. I was the one she called. Not Cassidy, who was busy with venue tours and dress fittings. Not my father, who was busy being enthusiastic about the merger of family prestige this wedding represented.
Me.
I was driving to my parents' house every other weekend, helping Mom manage her medications, talking her through her spirals, grocery shopping, cleaning, covering for her so that Cassidy's wedding planning could proceed without any shadow of maternal instability falling over it. I didn't complain. That was my role. I'd always filled it. The first incident that cracked something in me happened 9 months before the wedding, at Cassidy's engagement party. My father gave a toast. He talked about watching Cassidy grow up, about her grace and her beauty and her generous heart. He talked about how proud he was of the woman she'd become. He talked for 7 minutes. I counted. And at the end, he raised his glass and said, "To my little girl, my greatest joy." He did not mention me. I was standing 4 feet away from him, having driven 2 hours to be there, having spent the previous weekend helping my mother recover from a panic attack that had kept her in bed for 3 days. I was invisible, literally edited out of his greatest joy. My mother caught my eye across the room and gave me a small, helpless smile. That was it. That was the acknowledgement. I smiled back and raised my glass. The second incident was Cassidy's bachelorette weekend, which my mother decided I should organize entirely. Not help organize. Organize. Plan, book, coordinate, budget, chase down the 7 bridesmaids who couldn't agree on a location. I spent 3 weeks on it. I budgeted meticulously because I knew the other women's financial situations varied. I found a gorgeous house rental in Napa, organized wine tours, booked a private chef for one dinner. It came together beautifully. On the trip, Cassidy's maid of honor, a woman named Brianna who had known Cassidy since college, stood up at dinner the first night and gave a toast. She thanked everyone who'd made the weekend happen. She named every bridesmaid individually. She thanked the chef, the rental company, the wine tour guide. She did not mention me. Afterward, I said to Cassidy quietly, "That was a lovely toast." Giving her an opening, Cassidy squeezed my arm and said, You did such a good job with everything. You always do." And then she turned to Brianna, and they dissolved into laughter about something else. I went to bed that night, and I lay in the dark, and I thought, you always do. Like, I was a feature. A reliable appliance. The older sister, who handles things. The third incident was the one that started to harden something in me. 6 months before the wedding, my father called a family dinner. He had a proposal, he said. He and my mother had decided they wanted to gift Cassidy and Marcus a property, a piece of land outside the city that my father had been holding as an investment for years. He was going to transfer it to them as a wedding gift. "We wanted to tell you," he said to me across the dinner table, "so there are no surprises. Obviously, we'll make sure things are equal in the long run." "Obviously," I said. "You understand," he continued, in that tone he had, patient, slightly condescending, like he was explaining something to someone who might not follow, that this is a unique opportunity. Marcus's family connections could open doors for our business. Cassidy's future is something we want to invest in. Her future. As though I didn't have one. As though my future was a thing that had already sorted itself out and didn't require investment. "Of course," I said. "I understand completely." And I smiled because that was what I'd always done. And I drove home afterward, and I sat in my car in my own driveway, and I cried for 20 minutes. Not the pretty kind. The kind where you're embarrassed even though no one is watching. My mother had her first major health episode 4 weeks before the wedding. She collapsed in the kitchen on a Sunday morning. My father was at a golf game. Cassidy was at a final dress fitting. The housekeeper called me because she didn't know who else to call, and I drove 90 minutes to meet the ambulance at the hospital. By the time my father arrived, I'd already spoken to 2 doctors, filled out the intake paperwork, and sat with my mother through her first assessment. "What are they saying?" my father asked, not looking at me when he walked in, already scanning the room for a doctor with more authority. I told him everything I knew. He nodded. He went to find the attending physician himself, as though the information would be more real coming from someone in a white coat. Cassidy arrived an hour later, still in a silk blouse from the fitting, and the room immediately recalibrated around her presence. My mother reached for her hand. My father put his arm around her. I stepped back, which I'd learned to do automatically, and watched the 3 of them form their natural triangle. My mother was stabilized. Her heart was throwing irregular rhythms. Atrial fibrillation, they said, likely stress exacerbated. She needed monitoring.
Rest.
No stress. On the drive home, my father called me. "The wedding is in 4 weeks, he said. "I know, Dad. Your mother would want it to go ahead." "Dad, she just had a cardiac episode. She's going to be fine," he said firmly. "The doctors said she's stable. And the last thing Patricia Marsh would want is for this wedding to be disrupted on her account. You know her. You know that."
He wasn't wrong about that part.
My mother had spent her whole life making herself small so other people could take up space. But that didn't make it right. "Someone needs to stay with her," I said. "We'll hire a nurse for the week." "Dad." "Elena."
His voice shifted.
That tone. The tone that meant we're done discussing this. "Cassidy needs her family at that wedding. I need you there. Your mother needs you to be there celebrating your sister's marriage. If you can't do that, if you're going to make this difficult, I need you to understand that I will take that into account. I've worked very hard to make sure both my daughters are provided for. But I need to know that my family stands together." I was quiet. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I understand exactly what you're saying." What he was saying was, perform or lose your inheritance. And what I realized sitting in my car on the side of the road was that for the first time in my entire adult life, I no longer cared. What my father didn't know, what no one in my family knew, was that I had spent the previous 3 years quietly and very deliberately building a life that didn't need him. My practice had grown. I'd taken on 2 associate therapists. I'd paid off my student loans 18 months ahead of schedule. I'd bought my own home, small, but mine. Outright bought with my own savings and a mortgage I'd managed and paid down aggressively. I had an investment account that I'd built from nothing, one careful contribution at a time. I wasn't wealthy, but I was free. I had no debt to my father, financial or emotional, that I hadn't already quietly settled. The inheritance had always been the threat, the carrot and the stick both. And I had told myself for years that it mattered, that the money my father had been promising would someday make up for everything, would be proof that he had valued me all along, that the will was his way of saying you count. But sitting on the side of that road, I realized I had been waiting for a man to tell me I counted when I had already proven it to myself 100 times over. I called my attorney the next morning. Not about the will, about something else I'd been considering for a year and never acted on. My father's company, Marsh Construction, had been using my name as a reference on financial documents since I was in my mid-20s. Small things at first. I'd signed off on a loan application once, thinking I was a character reference. Later I'd noticed my name and social security number had appeared on a business credit account I'd never authorized. I'd raised it with my father once, gently, and he'd explained it away as an administrative shortcut, something to do with family business structuring, nothing to worry about. My attorney, a woman named Rachel Chun, whom I'd first hired to help me with my own practices incorporation, did not find it to be nothing. "Elena," she said, after I'd laid it all out, "you understand that unauthorized use of your personal identifying information for credit purposes is potentially fraudulent, regardless of family relationship." "I do now," I said. "Do you want to pursue this?" I thought about my mother in a hospital bed. I thought about my father on a golf course. I thought about a toast at an engagement party, where I'd been 4 feet away and hadn't been mentioned once.
Not yet, I said.
But I want to understand exactly what I have. What I had, it turned out, was significant. Over an 8-year period, my name and social security number had been used on 4 different business credit applications and 1 personal guarantee for a business loan. Rachel documented everything. She was careful and thorough, and she told me that if I chose to pursue it, I had a credible case. I didn't decide anything yet. I just needed to know where I stood. Then my mother went back to the hospital. The second episode happened 12 days before the wedding. She collapsed again, this time harder, this time with a longer recovery needed. She was admitted. The cardiologist used the phrase highly inadvisable when Cassidy floated the idea of my mother being present at the ceremony, even in a wheelchair, even briefly. The risk, he said, was too great. I was at the hospital when he said this. Cassidy cried. My father's jaw tightened. I held my mother's hand. That was when the Tuesday call happened, the one I told you about at the beginning. And when my father gave me his ultimatum, I had been awake for over 30 hours, I was sitting in a hospital waiting room, and I was done. I didn't call him back that day, or the next. On Wednesday, I spoke to my mother's cardiologist privately and made sure her care team had my number as her primary contact. My mother asked me, in a small voice, if I was going to the wedding. I held her hand and told her I was exactly where I needed to be. She didn't argue. I think she was relieved. On Thursday, I sent my father an email. Not a phone call, an email, so there would be a record. I told him I would not be attending the wedding or the rehearsal dinner. I told him that I was staying with Mom. I told him that I hoped Cassidy had a beautiful day. I wished her well, genuinely. And at the end, I wrote, regarding your comment about the will, I want you to know that I release you from any obligation you feel toward me in that regard. Please do whatever you feel is right. I am not available to be leveraged, and I don't need anything from you that comes with conditions attached. I sent it at 7:42 in the morning, and then I put my phone face down on the hospital room side table, and I went to get my mother some breakfast. My father's response came in 40 minutes. He was furious. The email was long, and it used phrases like ungrateful and selfish, and do you have any idea what this looks like, and your sister will never forgive you. He said I was choosing my own feelings over family unity. He said my mother, his wife, would be devastated if she knew I was using her illness as an excuse. I showed the email to my mother. She read it slowly. Then she set the phone down on the blanket and she looked at the ceiling for a moment. He's scared, she said finally. He's not good at scared. I know, I said. Are you going to be okay? She asked. Yes, I said. And I meant it, maybe for the first time in my adult life. I forwarded my father's email to Rachel. The wedding happened without me. I heard it was beautiful. Marcus's family had impeccable taste and money to match, and by all accounts the venue was stunning, the food was extraordinary, and Cassidy was radiant.
Of course she was.
She was always radiant. My father didn't speak to me for 6 weeks after. When he finally reached out, it was to invite me to dinner. Neutral territory, he said, a restaurant we'd been to as a family when I was young, a place I'd always liked. He said he wanted to clear the air. I agreed to come because I had things to say, and I wanted to say them in person. I drove there on a Saturday in late November. I arrived 5 minutes early. My father was already there, which surprised me. He was usually late. He looked older than I remembered, or maybe I was just seeing him differently. Cassidy was there too, which I hadn't expected. She was seated across from my father, her new wedding ring catching the light, her expression carefully composed. Elena, my father said, standing slightly, the way he did when he wanted to set a tone of civility. I sat down. The waiter brought water. I appreciate you coming, my father said. I think we all have things to say. I do, I said. Cassidy looked at me carefully. Elena, I want you to know that I'm not angry about the wedding. I understand that Mom was. I'm glad, I said. I want to hear what Dad has to say first. My father straightened. He was not used to being interrupted, however gently. I want to address the will comment, he said. I was under pressure. I was trying to leverage me, I said. You were trying to leverage me. That's not, he started. Dad. My voice was quiet.
Steady.
I'd practiced this not in the sense of rehearsing a performance, but in the sense of deciding what was true and what I needed to say. You used the inheritance as a threat. You have used it in various forms my entire adult life. And I want to tell you clearly that it doesn't work anymore. Not because I don't want your money, though I genuinely don't need it, but because I won't be managed that way.
Not by you.
Not by anyone.
He stared at me.
I've built my own practice, I continued. I own my own home. I have savings that have nothing to do with you. I don't say this to hurt you. I say it because I need you to understand that the leverage you think you have doesn't exist. Elena, Cassidy started. I'm not finished, I said. Not unkindly, but firmly. Cassidy, I'm glad your wedding was beautiful. I hope you and Marcus are genuinely happy. I mean that. But I want you to hear something too. I looked at her steadily. For the past year and a half, I organized your bachelorette trip, I coordinated with your vendors when Mom couldn't, I drove out every other weekend to make sure she was okay, so the wedding could proceed smoothly. I was at the hospital for both of her episodes. Neither time did you stay the night. Both times I did. I paused. I'm not asking for thanks. I'm asking you to know what actually happened. Because I think sometimes our family tells a story where I'm a background character, and I'm telling you now, I see the story differently. Cassidy's eyes filled with tears. My father's jaw had tightened to stone. You have always made everything about yourself, he said, and his voice had dropped to that low register I'd always been afraid of. Your mother needed support, and you turned it into a statement. My mother needed support, and I gave it, I said. You went to a golf game. Silence. I asked Rachel Chin to send you a letter, I said. I watched my father's face. Last week. Something shifted. He knew the name. I had mentioned Rachel before, years ago, when I'd incorporated my practice. He would have received the letter by then. He would have read it. I want to handle this quietly, I said. I don't want to damage the company or cause any more disruption than necessary. But I need you to understand that I am serious, and Rachel is serious, and the documentation is complete and organized. I folded my hands on the table. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I need to know that I have been seen. That what happened, the years of my name being used, the financial irregularities, I need that acknowledged and corrected. Formally. My father looked, for the first time in my memory, genuinely uncertain. What do you want? He asked. His voice was careful now. The bluster had gone somewhere else. I want the credit accounts corrected and my name removed from every document it shouldn't be on. I want a formal release from any liability connected to those applications. And I want an equal share in the estate planning, not because I need it, but because I have earned the same consideration as Cassidy, and I am done pretending otherwise. Cassidy had stopped crying. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between shock and a kind of stunned recognition. And if I don't agree, my father said. Then Rachel proceeds, I said simply. And the outcome will be messier and more expensive and more public for everyone, including the business, including Marcus's family, who I understand have significant visibility in this community. The mention of Marcus's family landed exactly as I expected it to. My father looked at his menu. He looked at the table. He looked, for one brief and unguarded moment, like a man who understood exactly how he'd miscalculated. I need time, he said. You have 2 weeks, I said. I stood, picked up my bag, and looked at both of them. I'm not your enemy. I've never been your enemy. I just needed you to understand that I'm not nothing either. I left them sitting at the table. I drove home through the November dark, and I felt astonishingly calm. Not triumphant, exactly. Not vindicated in any dramatic way. Just clear, like a room after all the windows have been opened. My father agreed to everything within 10 days. Rachel finalized the correction of all credit documents. My name was formally removed from every unauthorized account. The business loan guarantee was discharged, and a letter of legal release was signed. It was handled quietly, between attorneys, without litigation. My father, I think, understood that the alternative was far worse for him than the cost of simply doing what was right. The estate planning was harder. That conversation happened 3 months later, when my mother was recovered enough to be present. I asked for that deliberately. I wanted her to hear it. I wanted someone else to witness that I had asked, clearly and without apology, to be treated equally. My mother sat at the kitchen table and held her mug with both hands and said, "Robert, she's right. She's been right for a long time." He didn't argue. Cassidy and I had a separate conversation that winter, just the two of us. It was uncomfortable in the way that honest conversations often are.
She cried.
I didn't. I told her I didn't blame her for the dynamic we'd grown up in. That wasn't her fault. It was our parents' failure, and I'd had years to separate those two things. But I told her that if we were going to have a real relationship as adults, it needed to be one where I existed fully. Where I wasn't the stage manager off stage while she was in the spotlight. She said, "I didn't know how much you were carrying." "I know," I said. "But now you do. We're not close, not yet, maybe not ever, but we're honest. And that's more than we've ever been." It's been almost 2 years since all of this. My mother and I have a relationship now that I didn't think was possible. She calls me, not because she needs something organized, but because she wants to talk. We had a long conversation last spring about her own experience in the family, about the ways she made herself small and passed that smallness along to me without meaning to.
She cried.
I cried a little too. It wasn't resolution exactly, but it was real. My father and I are civil. Not warm. I don't think we'll ever be warm, but civil. He asks about my practice. I ask about the business. We are two people who have stopped pretending, and there's a strange dignity in that. My practice expanded last year. I hired a third therapist and opened a second location. I have a partnership now, a real one, with someone who has known me long enough to see me clearly. We have a home that I love and a life that is improbably exactly what I wanted. Here is what I know looking back. The will was never the point. The inheritance was never the point. The point was always the question underneath. Do I matter here? Am I seen? And my father had held the answer to that question over me for so long that I had confused the two things. I thought getting my fair share would mean I was finally valued. But what I discovered was that the moment I stopped needing the validation, the moment I could say I don't need anything from you that comes with conditions attached, that was the moment I was actually free. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that walking away from family is easy or clean or doesn't leave a mark. It leaves a mark. There are still days when I feel the ghost of that old longing to be seen, to be claimed, to be my father's greatest joy too. I don't think that ever fully goes away, but it has less power now. It has less power every year. If you are someone who is being leveraged by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, I want you to hear this. The thing they're holding over you is only as powerful as your need for it. Build your own ground. Build your own life. Build it quietly and steadily, and without asking permission. And then, when the moment comes, stand on it. The ground will hold. I promise you, the ground will hold. My name is Elena Marsh. I'm 34 years old. I'm the daughter my father once threatened to cut off. I beat him to it.